but there's tons of different frequency layers that are getting encoded together. So it's like kind of enmeshing them. The last video was basically an intro into PTSD and frequency, memories, coding, and formatting. I think formatting would be a good word, and then also the programming of our body, how to be used. Our brain is a biomechanical processing unit that can run our body and our systems without our awareness or consciousness being present. These also act as memories, so it can either be a program that the brain runs off of unconsciously, or a memory that's accessed during reality being perceived around us, which is a bit confusing. You have to know what's going on around you, and then what's coming up in the brain is a memory being played. Then your subconscious has to realize, okay, which is which? And your brain has to realize which is which, because it can get, like I said, very confusing. And then the body starts reacting because it doesn't know what the crippity crap is going on. And this comes from a disorganized mind. Sadhguru says it like this. He calls it diarrhea of the mind. And for many years, he has taught organizing the mind. And I didn't know what that meant until I started doing a deep dive into my own mind. And I started to understand that the way we envision the inside of our brain is the way it operates for us when we're not thinking about it. So basically, you have to set up the neural pathways to get your brain to function in the way it can do in the most organized way possible. So let's go back to PTSD. And I want to explain this subject or idea in a little more in depth. It's not going to be a long video. So let's say you take a 9-year-old kid and he is eating some ice cream, having a fun day. His guards are completely dropped. He has no reason to be defensive whatsoever. And he's just in full explore, love the world mode. Then all of a sudden, there is a railroad track with a car sitting on it with a school bus. And that train comes along, and this kid is freaking out. Like, he's freezing. He sees a school bus. His friends are on it, and a train comes plowing through, blowing its horn. The school bus is broken down, engine smoking, and that train just plows through a school bus. And the reason I'm saying this is because this is a horrific event that gets put in that kid's mind and is recorded. There are many different layers to this. And like I had said in the last video, everything operates on a frequency. The light is a frequency. The sound is a frequency that's going in. The sound going out is a frequency. Those are the main things that get recorded in the brain. And then emotions are a frequency as well. So this little kid has all of his guards dropped, and he's 100% vulnerable when he receives this horrible image recording in his brain. So now there is all this imagery that gets recorded in, all these sounds that get recorded in, and then all of his feelings get recorded in. So this creates a much more compressed or in-depth memory. So let's say at first he was listening to the birds, he was eating ice cream, and he was feeling the breeze and just chilling out. So those are like the three main things that were being recorded onto a memory. Let's say it's a track, and it's like that thick, and it's like three main lines are being recorded, and they're frequencies, because when they are read, they are translated back into what the consciousness can perceive, because a memory is a coding that gets filed away. Well, let's say little Johnny's brain is just used to recording in that memory pattern. So now he perceives the train whistle blowing. There's another line in there. The train is on the way. He knows that it's about to hit the bus. So that's another level of recording, that knowledge. Maybe he hears people screaming on the bus. That's another layer being recorded in. And then he feels this terror, this dread. That's another layer being recorded into this memory / programming. And then the train hits the school bus and just chaos and horror ensue. There are all these different layers that are now being recorded into this memory, which is very in depth. So now his brain has never accessed the recording capability needed to record all of that. But now it is all of a sudden forced to record all that into one memory. Well, in that brain now, the brain doesn't have a slot to store such a thick, involved memory. And I want to say this again, because the way I see it in my mind, it's hard to explain it with words. All these coding layers of screaming, the dread, the emotions, the sights, the bus being hit, just that whole scenario is just having to be recorded immediately. So it's like, where does this get put? Does this get put in the file of Saturday sitting on the swing eating ice cream listening to the birds? Well, check this out. So maybe this is little Johnny's routine on Saturday mornings after watching cartoons to go outside, eat some ice cream, and just enjoy the beautiful day. And there's this file folder when he goes back in to, let's say he goes back in to do some chores. The brain is like, all right, we're going to put this in the fun Saturday morning drawer. We're going to close that drawer now. Okay, cool. Now, the beginning recording on this most current volume being put in to this file folder of a Saturday morning for little Johnny, the first portion of that recording was fantastic. And then the last portion of it just was sheer horror and terror. Okay, what if it does get filed away in that file drawer where it's just a fun Saturday morning? Do you think the brain is going to want to go into that file drawer ever again to access that? That's why it ganks up the future for going out there and enjoying those Saturday mornings, for the fact that the brain now has a memory of this is a possibility that can happen and we want to avoid this at all costs. So now the experience of sitting on the porch, eating ice cream, listening to the birds, feeling the breeze, just enjoying life is ruined. Absolutely ruined and avoided. Okay, let's look at this also. What if it cannot get filed in there? What if it is so multi-layered and not able to process that it does not go in that memory slot and it just goes somewhere random in the brain, bouncing around? Now it can be accessed at any random time, and it pops up and it's viewed, and the body will be in response to that event like it's just happening. Or a lot of times with kids, what will happen is that file gets put in that file drawer of fun Saturday morning and locked away forever. Do not open it. But then at all costs, sitting on that porch eating ice cream is avoided just so that memory will not be pulled out and viewed. So we can take that and apply it in many, many other locations in life where we look at a traumatic event and why do we avoid this at such a deep level? Like, why will we not step into this situation? Or why will we not do this certain thing? There's many times where the brain has just shut that off. Like, we avoid every possible trigger that will activate this horrible memory or programming to protect us, to defend us. Let's say a child, for instance, spills milk, or not even spills milk. Let's say they do something in the house that the parent does not like and just abuses the child. Let's say, for instance, something silly, but like we are coming out of a generation of a lot of abuse of kids that was hidden. So let's say this little kid wasn't putting on a shirt fast enough, and I'm going to bring up a horrible situation here just to show an example of PTSD, how it's created. So let's say this kid is told to go get a shirt on. And he goes to get a shirt on, and the dad is just very angry. And it's very safe for him to take his anger out on a child inside his own house because there is no repercussions and there is no authority and there is no, accountability. So he feels safe to let all of his anger out. So he runs in there, grabs his child, picks him up by the hand, and just whips him up and down with a belt and just bruises them all up. So this child is going through this horrible traumatic event when he's going to change his clothes. So now that file, instead of being like, oh, go and pick out some clothes, put them on to feel good and look good, that area is avoid this completely. Like, so then when, for the rest of that life, that person, when they go to change their clothes or anything of that nature, that is very closely associated with triggering that memory of that abuse. So they rush through it and there's all this anxiety and they don't know why. But that memory has been repressed, and then the brain helps protect the subconscious from viewing that memory. But still there's all this anxiety that's built up and all this fear and terror. And a person doesn't even know why it's happening when they're just going to change clothes. So that can happen in so many situations in children's lives that are hidden by the adults, because no adult's going to go out and say, hey, I just abused my kid and I jacked him up for life. You know, they're going to hide it. And they will invalidate and they will make the kid feel like it never happened. Because when parents think like, oh, kids are so resilient, and kids go on and act like it never happened, and the parent feels like, oh, cool, got away with it. Well, no, you didn't, because your abuse or your traumatic event that you were programming into that child's mind was just blocked out. And so now the brain is going to inhibit that little human from doing anything that is associated with pulling out that memory. And it doesn't work that way with everything, but that is just one representation of PTSD. So let's take that child, grows up to an adult, and then they have a kid of their own, and their kid does not. Now this is where we get into the years and years and years of repression. But then when it comes time for the brain to access, how do I operate in this situation, then it pulls out that programming. It's like when the child does not get dressed fast enough, play this programming. And then the parent gets angry and mad and yelling and just freaking out. And then they step back and they're like, why did I do that? So if you're a parent, how many times have you just took a step back from your kid and you just were dumbfounded and like wondering like, where did that come from? Like, why did I act that way? And then over time of processing it, you're like, oh my goodness, then my parents are coming out at me. That's because that programming as a child was hidden. But now, when you are triggered with that situation, it's like a three-dimensional programmed recording that gets pulled out and showed subconsciously, this is how you conduct yourself in this situation. And it works with many, many, many other things too that way. Many other things. And in another video, I'll get into all about the combat stuff. Like, that's very different. The brain's operating different then. But for kids, let's say it just happens many, many ways. That it happens many times over the course of a child's life. Well, during their childhood. So imagine all the things that they become afraid of and all the things they avoid because the brain is trying to protect them from these adults that are not safe. But those adults may not even be around anymore, but the brain still inhibits the child from doing all these things because it's like remembering when we went into this territory before, this would happen. So basically, one thing that I've learned is going through and deconstructing the memories and the programming. You have to separate all the emotions and realize, like, the spirit doesn't take damage. The brain gets programmed incorrectly and doesn't know where to put this stuff. So therein lies where it's important to go in and create new programming on how to handle and navigate situations. Character trigger works really well with this because we become so inhibited by adults as a child that follows us into our adult life and makes us scared of so many things. For instance, one last thing and I will zip it. And I hope this has been helpful or enlightening in some way. A little kid climbs up to the attic when they aren't supposed to because it's so cool. Just want to get up there and explore. And the parent comes up and just freaks out on them, tells them these horrible things that are going to happen to them, scares the crap out of that kid, like literally makes him come back down, punishes him, spanks him. Then that kid grows up to an adult, and that adult goes up the attic and just starts shaking and scared to death and just can't even function. Well, their body's perfectly capable, their brain's perfectly capable, but the brain is pulling out that programming of this is how the body reacts because something horrible may happen from a parent. And it's not always a parent, but a lot of times it is the parent. And if you're one of those parents, let me tell you this, like, you got to drop all your shame, blame, and judgment of yourself because programming is a generational thing. And one parent can do it horribly, then they do it horribly to their kids, then they do it to their kids. But there has to be a point in time where it's like, I'm not going to pass this programming on any more. Like, it ends here. And there's another term for that. It's called generational curses. But it's not a curse, it's programming. It's just really shitty programming. Though as adults, it is our responsibility to reprogram our minds to operate in a manner that is conducive of being a good person and a good example to the next people that are being raised and not pass those things on. And that's just encouragement to do a deep dive, separate and understand this is programming, these are the emotions, and this is where I want to be, and I need to reprogram this portion of programming, like basically pull it out, reprogram it, or push it back in and put it in a new program if I want to break through those barriers that were put in my mind while my mind was developing. I hope this was helpful. I'm done. The end. And the next video is either going to be about power, stretching, or war PTSD.